Hello, my name is Madit Yel. I'm the director, producer, and host of Leaders in Focus podcast, which brings you stories from South Sudanese members, the diaspora community back home in South Sudan. And sometimes we bring in subject matter experts who have something to teach our community. My guest today is Maxwell Wuriem James Morgan. Maxwell is the vice chair of Omaha City Charter Convention 2022, where he serves as the member of the finance subcommittee. Maxwell is also the co-owner of Kush Konsolidated, which is a digital media based here in America. He's also the co-host of Kush Consider podcast. Maxwell is a graduate of Creighton University, and he's currently pursuing a master's in international relations at Northwestern University in Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome to the program, Maxwell.
Brother Madit, thank you so much for having me on Leaders in Focus podcast. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time. Just reading over your bio, you're a busy man. Not only are you involved with the city, but you're an entrepreneur, and I know how that grind goes. So I appreciate you taking the time on July 4th, a holiday that you should be spending the way you plan to spend it. But it's a pleasure. I'm actually glad and excited that you are my first guest in this season. We've rebranded. We used to be called the Sawa Network podcast, but now we have a new logo and we branded with a new name, and it's Leaders in Focus. And our objective, as I said earlier in the introduction, is just to, chronicle South Sudanese stories from all walks of life. And, my interest is just to hear about each other, those of us in the diaspora back home, and sometimes bring in subject matter experts with something that they can teach or something that our community members can learn from. So glad to have you here. Please, if there's something I missed out, an introduction is not always perfect. If there's something you would love to add before we start our regular program, feel free if there's something I missed out in the introduction.
No, you got it, man. You're good at your job. So you pretty much covered it all.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Glad I got that. Okay, Max. Just like I've been doing with season one and all past guests, for me, interviewing members of South Sudanese, whether they're, diasporans or back home in South Sudan, I always want to go back to the origin story, right? The motherland, your story. And so the first question is, what is your South Sudan story? If you were born there, I would love to hear what that experience was like. And if you were born here, I would love to hear about how your parents ended up here as well. So please just share with us, what is your South Sudanese origin story?
Well, I have a pretty similar, but a little bit different, a little unique story. I was born in Juba, 1988. And then, this was during the height of the war, as we all know. And I believe that was around the time, the SPLA was about to attack Juba. So, it was a very hectic time. We had to escape at that time, and we went to Kenya. So we were refugee camps in Thika refugee camp, right outside of Nairobi. Well, right now it's the heart of Nairobi because they have a mall right there. But back then, there was none of that. There was no development. It was just a refugee camp. And people don't even know that it exists anymore because it's one of the many camps that were closed shortly after we came here to the States. So after going to Thika, we were resettled here in the US in 1992 in Cleveland, Ohio. We stayed there for about 2 years, and then some other families that we were with in Thika refugee camp had resettled to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So, as we do in our community, when there's one South Sudanese person that moves somewhere, we congregate and we try to form a community.
Right.
We were able to do that and form our own little South Sudanese community in Sioux Falls, and it began to grow. And it actually became one of the places where when many South Sudanese came to the US, a lot of them would gravitate to Sioux Falls because we already established a community there. So I lived there until 2004 when we moved to Nebraska. And I like to say, I grew up in Sioux Falls, but Nebraska has really kind of formed my young years. For those people that don't know, Nebraska has the largest population of South Sudanese in the entire country, particularly Omaha. So that's when I really started getting kind of involved with just being active in my community, working with my community. It started with One Voice Next Generation, but I think we're going to get to that point.
Right.
So
right.
originally from from Lincoln. I graduated high school in Lincoln, but I went to university in Omaha at Creighton University. And yeah, now we're here.
That's an interesting story, right? I mean, almost all of my guests that I've interviewed, you're the first guest in our first episode of season 2, but in season 1 as well, almost all of the 6 guests, were born in South Sudan and had some experience there prior to coming to the United States, or going to Australia. For some of the guests that I interviewed in Australia. So it's always interesting to me, right? To kind of like, the point is connecting the dots, and thanks for sharing that. To follow up on that, it's not always easy, right? Regardless of how old you are, when you go to a new country or a new region where, there's a new language, there's a new culture, and certain social norms and rules. What was the transition like, right? Being born in South Sudan, living in Kenya, and coming here. What was that experience like culturally?
Well, I was able to easily adjust with the language because I started school pretty young, so I was able to pick up. The biggest difficulty was actually socially. When I was living in Sioux Falls, I would be the only South Sudanese, the only African, and most of the time the only Black person that ever be in my class. So I was in a white space for the majority of my life while still maintaining my culture and my roots. There was also a lot of other I would say difficulties with adjusting to this culture, because we're Black, right? South Sudanese, we're Black. We're some of the Blackest people on the planet. Right? But when we came to America, we learned, there's other Black people here. And it wasn't always the easiest being able to, because we look at them like, okay, those are our Black brothers, but it wasn't so easy back then. Back then, people weren't listening to Afro beats. They weren't eating fufu. It wasn't cool. It wasn't cool to be African.
Right.
So growing up, I almost had more conflict with African Americans than I did with Kawajat or white people or anybody else. So the toughest part was trying to, adjust to this culture while still maintaining, because when you're at school, you do the Pledge of Allegiance, you do all those things, you're an American. But you come back home, you Sudanese, like you eat your food, right. You do everything that you do, you practice your own cultural things. So it was just that balance of trying to balance, what you do at home and who you are with the community and the culture that you need to also, because when you come to someone's land, you have to assimilate to some degree. You can't just continue to do the things you did back home in a full spectrum of things. You have to adjust, you have to take advantage of the situation. So just learning that balance, I would say, of maintaining your culture and also assimilating into the new environment that you're in.
Very interesting. You mentioned something about, being, most of the times being the only, Black person in your class, for example, and whenever, and Omaha, Nebraska has one of the largest South Sudanese diaspora communities here in America.
Yeah, it does now, yeah.
Right. So whenever I share that, whenever I share that with people, and especially white folks, there's always that look of surprise in their eyes, like, what, Omaha, Nebraska, and all the places.
They always ask where they got Black people there, and I'm like, you'd be surprised. We have the people in the world, and we're here.
Right, because the thinking is, they, for some of them who know, like, the climate in South Sudan, right, hot and tropical and humid.
Yes.
And then they look at, Nebraska, one of the coldest places, right, in America, and they're like, who would want to come from that kind of climate and go there, right?
Yeah, imagine.
But as you said earlier, it's kind of like, if you come here as a South Sudanese and you hear there are other South Sudanese somewhere, you're more likely to go there, right, because of the culture and you being aware of how you would be treated there if you go there. So that's interesting. And you talked about colorism too, right? I had I had my own experiences, right? I didn't go to high school here, but I went to college here. That's how I actually came to the US. I went to Arizona State. And I've had those experiences, right? I lived in Cairo, Egypt too, had some of that. So I wasn't really, it wasn't a shock to me, but it was more,
bad there.
Right. But it was more so of like, okay, this is a place where, Black people have endured a lot in the past, and they have fought for their freedoms. And you would think that, people who look like you here would celebrate and appreciate you, right?
You would think, yeah.
You would think so, but I was
Yeah.
surprised. But it is what it is. It takes time. It takes time.
Yeah, and as you can see, like now it's like with Black Panther coming out and just with music, Wizkid's Essence song was the #1 song in America for the longest, an African artist. So I think now, like we're finally getting to that point where it's not only acceptable, it's cool to be African now. Like, oh yeah, I want to try African food. I want to go to Ghana. I want to go to South Africa or wherever, So I think, everything takes time. I feel people are now, it's 2022. If you want to remain ignorant, that's a personal choice. There's so much information. I tell my African American friends all the time, how come you guys don't go vacation in Africa?
Right.
And they're, well, it's dangerous. I'm like, well, Mexico has more murders. Cancun, these places that you guys travel to with no fear, have way more murders than in Africa. Like you go to Kigali, you will not even see violence like that. I know the media portrays Africa the way it does, but the reality on the ground is much different.
Beautiful place. I totally understand. I've been to Kigali, Rwanda myself in 2017, and I was amazed. I was amazed with the level of relative development compared to the region, and just the fact that I felt safe, regardless of what time I was in the streets at night. So there's definitely some progress there that the world is not portraying or is not telling that narrative. But as you said, Afrobeats is hip now. Everybody wants to be African, listen to African, consume African. And I think for me, it's not what others think about you, right? It's what you think of yourself. At the end of the day, that's what's going to change their perspective. And I think, the young African generation is finally getting to understand that, right? It's about marketing. It's about doing your own job and putting your story out there.
Exactly.
And people are going to judge it the way they're going to judge it. And if you're doing a great job, guess what? As they say, first they laugh at you and then they laugh with you.
Yeah.
I think the world is laughing with Africa right now.
They are.
Yeah, so it's a great thing. It's a great time to be an African for sure. Max, my next question is on education. And this is a topic that is close to my heart, and mainly, understanding where we came from, as a people and as South Sudanese, right? The history of decades of conflict and war and underdevelopment. Up until today, I would say, I don't know the exact statistics, but majority of South Sudanese who are college graduates would often be, the first in their immediate family, if not, the whole extended family, right, to, graduate high school or even go on to have a 4-year, education and go on to grad school. So if you can share your education experiences, right? You went to Creighton University. If you could share about what that experience was like, what did you study, and what was the motivation for you? And if you could answer, were you the first in your family to go to college?
Okay, well, as you mentioned, I went to Creighton University. Creighton University is a private Catholic school here in Omaha, Nebraska. It's part of the Big East Conference, so that's like Georgetown, St. John's, a lot of like the East Coast Catholic schools. It's a pretty prestigious school here in the Midwest, really. So I got a scholarship to go there based on my performances in high school and whatnot. So when I got there, it was different. It's like I said, it's a majority white school. It's a preppy school. Once again, I'm usually the only Black person, right. African. Now there's quite a few South Sudanese that went there and graduated, but I think at the time I might have been one of the very few, one of the only two or three. I believe there's another girl that went there, but she passed away now. R.I.P. to her. So what I studied there, I'm a poli-sci guy, I'm a political science major. And it was a very great experience for me because I had professors that had a lot of real world experience. One of my professors worked in Russia for a long time. He did intelligence in Russia. And I've had a lot of great conversations with him. And they've kind of also helped steer me into a lot of different, avenues and international events that I've been able to attend due to some of the relationships that I've forged at Creighton University. It's a school that I would say is now searching for diversity. They really want to promote more diversity. But at the time, once again, it was not a place that was necessarily, I could see someone like myself being there. So after graduating there, I took a little time off. I did some work in the community with a nonprofit in Lincoln called One Voice Next Generation. It's a Sudanese nonprofit. So I co-facilitated some summer programs there for a couple of years. And then I was like, okay, the pandemic kind of hit. So I was like, okay, I just registered to go start my master's at Northeastern. And the whole pandemic kind of just threw everything off because at Northeastern, I'm studying international relations and international development as well. One of the key things that's important to me is really the development of statehood development. You know, South Sudan, we're a new nation. We're starting from scratch. We literally have no infrastructure, whether that's physical. We do have the resources though. We have the resources, we have the capacity with our diaspora, people like you, people like me, a lot of other people that are doing well, going to school, getting their skills, whatever the skill set that may be. So that's kind of what's motivated me in my pursuit of knowledge. But I was also fortunate to have great leadership from my family growing up. You know, my father, he got his master's here. We actually moved to Nebraska because he was going to get his PhD here at the University of Nebraska. But then that was right before, it was around during the time of the CPA. So John Gutting had actually came here. He had came to Iowa State, and you know, my father's heavily involved in the liberation at that time. And you know, John Gutting told my dad, like, hey, I need you to come back home and help with the nation building process. So he left. So he didn't finish his doctorate. He's actually about to graduate this month with his doctorate. You know, and I always ask him, I'm like, you already, you know, you're very successful. Why? Why do you want to continue to get a PhD for what? You know? And he's like, this is something that I've always put in my mind to do. And I have to accomplish it. I don't care if I'm 80, if I'm 90. And he's like, I expect you to go even higher. So I was like, how can I go higher than a PhD?
Right,
you know, it doesn't matter. You better find out how to do it.
You do a postdoc.
Yes, exactly. Like, you better. That's up to you to figure it out.
Right.
My mother is also a graduate. She's a teacher. So education is something very, very, very important in my family. From the time when I was young, we was always told, like, you know, we're here. You know, I used to play basketball a lot. So they're like, oh, you know, we're not here to play basketball. We're here to get schooling so that we can go back and build our country. And this is before we even had a country, when we were still fighting. But they're like, once we get a country, you guys will be going back to build this country. So since I was young, I've always had in my mind that whatever skills I access here, whatever knowledge I access here, it's for me to take back home and help with my people and help with the nation building process. And that's kind of just been my main motivation since then.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I don't usually get that. Most of my guests and you know, ordinary South Sudanese in my life are usually the first, you know, in their family to obtain higher education or to even, you know, graduate in high school. So it's nice to hear that, right? You know, there are a few of us out there, right, whose parents are educated and are educators themselves, like your mom, and they were able to be there when you needed them, because that support is very crucial.
It is.
I am actually, I'm a first generation graduate in my immediate family. And
congratulations to you, man.
Thank you.
Hey,
thank you.
that cycle starts with you.
It does start with me. It does start with me. And, you know, my goal is right now to just make sure that I pass it forward, just make sure that the next generation that are coming behind me and my family extended and even my community, right, giving them that opportunity of education. That way it just doesn't end with me. So it is beautiful to hear that. And it seems like you, through your dad's activism and involvement with the South Sudanese movement early on, you had an opportunity to actually meet late Dr. John Gurren. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, I met him several times. I met him 2 times. They had came to Sioux Falls, like the commanders. I was James Wani, Taban Deng, Nyal Deng, Paul Malong. Majority of them, they had came here for a visit, and you know, our house was kind of like the headquarters, so they would all come, they would eat at my house. So I was very fortunate to see, you know, the early steps of the liberation you know, from early age. It was a real thing to me. It's something that even now when I see it, it's still crazy. It's still crazy to imagine from that time till now. But, you know, it really gave me a good sense of my culture and what we're fighting for. So, you know, it's easy to come to America and lose your culture. You know, if I didn't have that, who's to say I would know anything about even where I come from? And I've been here 30 years now.
Right.
And I could have easily just said, you know what, I don't even identify with that. That's something that doesn't even matter in my life. Who cares? You know, but when something is real, when something's tangible, when you see it in front of you, you know, it's hard for you to ignore that.
That's beautiful. Hey, I must tell you, you know, I met Pagan Amom, I think back in 2013 or 2012 at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi.
Oh, okay.
He was nice enough, you know, to shake my hand. And then I think in 2015 there was
well, you guys are both in first class, so you had to shake your hand.
no, actually, it was in the waiting area at the airport.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was waiting to board a plane to Juba, and I'm not sure where he was, but I kind of assumed he was probably going to Juba as well. And then I had the opportunity to meet.
Well, you just walked up and introduced
I just walked up because I knew who he was. Yes.
Yeah.
I've been following the movement early on too, before independence, and just like yourself, you know, I had family members, you know, who were wise enough to always advise me to, you know, stick to school, right? You know, with the vision that one day when you get your education, you'll be part of the generation that will go back home and try to rebuild the country. So I had that support too, and I think it really helped, and I'm sure it did in your case as well. So yeah, I was saying I met, you know, James Wani Iga with a couple of government delegates back here. I think it was 2015 or 16. They were visiting in Phoenix.
Okay. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
So, you know, so it's always nice, you know, to meet these people, because, you know, years from now on, it's going to be history, right? For you to say, you know, I saw and I met and I shook hands, you know, with a founding father, you know, a bigger figure like late, you know, Dr. John is a great story, you know, to tell your great grandchildren, right?
Yeah, because, you know, these days, if you don't have a picture, nobody believes, you know, nothing is real unless, you know, you can prove it. So, but yeah, I get exactly what you're saying. It's a good reference point, you know.
It is. It's beautiful. Maxwell, and this is the most interesting point and really what got me excited to bring you here on the Leaders in Focus podcast is your involvement with the Omaha City Council. If you could tell us about how did you get involved? What are you doing currently with the City Council, and what impact are you having on our local community, namely the South Sudanese community in Omaha, Nebraska?
Okay. Well, how the process works. So the city charter is done every 10 years. The city charter is the constitution of the city. So just like any country, or there's changes that happen, especially now we're in the technology age where 5 years even, remember 5 years ago, we wasn't even using Zoom like this. We wasn't using a lot of things. So there needs to be updated quite a bit. So now that convention, you get recommended, you have to be recommended to it by a city council member. So each city council member selects one person to nominate, and then the mayor selects 8 people she wants to nominate. So I was nominated by District 2 Councilwoman Juanita Johnson. She's an African-American lady here. And the District 2 is North Omaha, which is majority Black. That's where most of our people actually live as well. So just based on the work that I've been doing in the community, some events she's seen me at, and she reached out to me and she was like, you know, I've been seeing that you've been, you know, doing work in the community. I see that there's no representation in the community. I'd like to work together with you. You know, mainly she was asking me like, what is going on with the gang violence here in Omaha? How can we, the city is concerned about the level of violence in the South Sudanese community because it is getting out of hand. And we're trying to find out any avenue, you know, we can to possibly mitigate this issue. So, you know, I told her, I was like, you know, number one, representation matters. When people don't see someone that looks like them, they rebel. And rebellion can be many forms. Rebellion can be gangs, drugs, any illicit activity is a form of rebellion towards the state, right? I'm like, that's number one. Number two, economics. We are not represented. Like we don't even know about these chambers of commerce that we have available, the resources we have available to us. There's no communication between the state and our community. And we have 15 to 20,000 people here. This is not a number of people you can just ignore. If we were Chinese, if we were Indian, you would be knocking on our doors, asking how you can work with us. But for some reason, that's not happening in our community. So you're like, okay, well, you can be the start of this. And, you know, that's kind of how it started. So I never really, I didn't reach out. I didn't like start doing work in the community because I wanted to be known as a leader. You know, I think we have this issue in our community. I call it bandit disease, you know. Everybody wants to be bandit. Everybody wants to be leader. Everybody wants to be bandit, but nobody wants to put the work in. You know, as a leader, your community should be like, hey, this guy is our leader. We are going to follow him because of the work he's put in, not for any other reason besides that. So it kind of just happened naturally. It was nothing that I sought out to do. So now that I was appointed, you know, the work started in May, where we go through the 65-page charter, which is a constitution. We go through it section by section. It's so large that, you know, we had to break it up into committees. That's why I'm part of the finance subcommittee. So now how the community comes into this, number one, representation. I'm the first South Sudanese to ever be appointed into this important charter. That's one. But the second part is now, you know, I sit down with my community. I ask, what are the issues for this? I mean, I pretty much know, you know, if you're involved in your community, you know what the issues are, but you still go and do due diligence and ask what are the problems in the community. And then, you know, they're like, okay, well, we need more financial help. We need loans. We need grants. We need A, B, C, D. Now I take these complaints and I go back to the convention. I'm like, hey, we would like to, and I write a proposal. Me and council members will write a proposal to include it into a vote that's going to happen in our general election voting in November. So let's say, for example, rent is just so high, which is pretty much everywhere in the US.
True. Right.
Most recently, last week, I proposed an amendment that, you know, we should have a statute that has rent control or a rent cap, because these new developments that are being built in these areas, North Omaha, are displacing the people that already didn't have the money to begin with. Now the city is bringing new developments, which we can't argue with, but you're displacing the people that are there. So I proposed that there should be a cap on rent for a certain percentage or number of units in each new development, so that we're not kicking out the people that make the culture of that community, the people that already don't have a place to go. So it's things like that. It's positions of power to be able to influence laws and policy is what we've never had in our community. So we're still, this is actually the next 2 weeks of the last week. So I'm really right now, I'm meeting with as many people as I can from my community to put on our last proposals. And then I could put the proposals in, now it'll be voted upon by the convention. And then the convention, we vote on it, then it gets pushed to the city council. Now the city council will push it forward and make sure it's on the ballot in November. So essentially, I'm in a position to help influence and create policies in the state.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful work. As I said earlier, you know, when I saw that in your bio, I said I had to ask Maxwell about how he got involved, because, you know, if you understand, you know, the U.S. system, right? It's a federal government, but usually the most impactful one, or the one that reaches the average person, right, the layman, is always the local government. Right. If you're not involved, if you don't know who your local representatives are or what agenda is on the table or is being discussed, you may be missing out on representing your interests. And I think, you know, to your point, right, if you got over tens of thousands of South Sudanese living in a city like or a state like Nebraska, that's a significant number of people who should be, you know, getting involved in the city level and advocating for their own interests, as well as, you know, the interests of their fellow community members. So I congratulate you on taking that initiative, and I hope whoever's listening to this conversation, you know, we have a lot of states where there's a good number of South Sudanese, and it doesn't have to be a significant number, right? It's just getting involved and knowing what your government is doing on a state level, and how you can get involved and have your voice heard. So congratulations on that. And I think you are among a few pioneers who are doing that and waking up to the reality of the importance of being represented. I'll be remiss if I don't ask you about, your work with Kush Consolidated LLC and the Kush Convos podcast. As you can tell, I'm a podcast guy. I love doing this work. And, what is Kush Consolidated LLC? What do you guys do? And how has that experience been so far?
Okay, so Kush Consider LLC is our digital media company. Earlier you had mentioned how important it is to tell your story, to control your narrative. And, there's been I mentioned a little bit about Omaha. There's been a terrible narrative, a very negative narrative about us, whether it's gangs, fighting, deportations, you name it. We've been stigmatized with all those labels and stuff. So, it's very important that I felt, even South Sudanese in general, we mentioned Nigerians earlier, and how just to be able to push your own is very important. South Sudanese, we don't have something that pushes us. We don't have a platform to push our own. Nigerians, you go to a club, let's say, the DJ might be Nigerian. He's gonna make sure he plays 20 Nigerian songs that night. That's a platform. So we can't sit here and complain about people are calling us this or thinking we're this way when we have the power in 2022. It was 2020 at the time, but we have the power to write our own narrative, to put our own stories. So the name, we came up with the name, it's funny, I always have to explain this because people always associate Kush with a lot of different things,
But not smoking.
Yeah, but not smoking. So a lot of people think it's like a show about smoking, but it actually has nothing to do with that. I always have to explain, Kush is where we come from. Kush is historically, the kingdom that we reigned over Egypt, we reigned over East Africa. We're not just the people that, we always say South Sudan is the newest country, but we're also one of the oldest people on the planet. Our civilization is historic. We've been around, we ruled over Egypt, whichever civilizations you guys want to talk about, we were there. So it was an ode to our past, and an ode to, something that is honorable. I know right now when people mention South Sudan, people are like, you guys like just to fight war, this, that. So we wanted to connect with something that is very important. Even historically, we have places in our country called New Kush, places that were very important in the liberation. So it's an ode to that whole sentiment of recreating what was once ours and recreating even better in the modern time. So we were like, okay, Kush Consolidated LLC has many other facets. We also have HNI, which is Habari Network International. We have Kush Convos, the podcast. It was the flagship. And that's really right now what we kind of focus on. We're about to revamp and do season 2 actually right now. And the whole point of that was to highlight success stories of the Black diaspora, particularly the Sudanese diaspora. I think our brother Luol Deng has shown that our greatest resource is our people. These kids that he's getting from all over from the diaspora, these are the stories that we're talking about. These are the kids that, given a chance, can run the world, can be number one in whatever we want to do. We got models, we have doctors, so many doctors. We have engineers, lawyers, you name it. There's not a South Sudanese that's not doing it. So our goal is to try to highlight as many of those people as we possibly can and change that narrative.
Very important, very important. And that's pretty much in a nutshell what we try to accomplish with Leaders in Focus, right? It's the ability to share stories of overcoming, and stories of thriving and success that can go a long way. You never really know who's listening to what conversation at any time and what they're getting from it, right? And the point is always, if it's a productive conversation, someone is going to take something from it and apply it to their lives. And it's a great work. It's a great work. I know both you and I know better. The power of being able. I won't necessarily call it controlling the narrative, because controlling can have a negative connotation, right? You can do propaganda stuff that is not helping people.
Exactly.
just because you have a reach, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's just having the freedom and the platform where people can share diverse views, right? Learn about certain information and you know, push their stories and their narratives that, you know, won't be available anywhere else. So it's a great job that you're working on. Maxwell, I can't stress enough, you know, the South Sudanese diaspora. Like for me, you know, that makes you and I, that makes everyone else who's living outside of South Sudan. And then for me, when I looked at our stories, like how it all started from South Sudan and how we end up where we are, I can't help but always think, what does that look like in terms of connecting the dots, right? If you're here in America and you're doing the, you know, the amazing work that you're doing, I'm interested in knowing, as a South Sudanese, someone who's aware of the history of the country and what it needs to develop. What do you think in general? And you may speak about your own experience, but also, what do you think is the role of the South Sudanese diaspora in helping South Sudan achieve its development goals, whether that is social, economic, or political? And what does that mean for you personally?
I think that the future of South Sudan depends on the diaspora, to be honest with you. You know, when you look at countries like Israel, right? They went through what they went through after World War II. They were dispersed around the world. What they did, instead of giving up or allowing them to be destroyed, they're like, okay, we're gonna get educated. We're gonna be business owners. We're gonna put ourselves in a position where no one ever can dominate us again. So that's one example. You look at China. China is going through its economic growth right now because of its diaspora. Its diaspora sends so much money back home to China, because China, it's not free enterprise where you can just have businesses. So they got to have some kind of money coming in. So they really heavily depend on their diaspora to build China. And I think it also applies in the case of South Sudan. You know, we send so much money back home, and so much money. That alone can do something for our people back home. Secondly, we're here acquiring skills, acquiring knowledge. You know, I know everyone in our country wants to have a PhD. You know, everybody wants to be known as doctor. That's fine. You know, get your education. But I believe you should use your education and your skills to develop your country and not to take advantage of your people. You know, we know our people, 70% are illiterate. You know, a lot of our people are not educated. I think that a lot of us that came out here to get education, it's our duty and responsibility to go home, to build schools, to build trade shops so we can teach people how to be electricians. Anybody that's picked up a skill here in America and you're South Sudanese, I believe it's your responsibility to go back home and transfer those skills and knowledge, even if it's business, even if you learn how to make what kind of business here in America, take that back home and build 10 more of those. Teach someone how to do that. I think it's our responsibility more than our people back home to build South Sudan. And I believe in the power of the youth. I really do. You know, I know right now things seem like it's very bleak. There's no hope, but I don't believe in that. I believe that I have faith from the youth that I've worked with, the youth that I know that we're all pretty much on the same pace. And I think that we need to just avoid some of the cycles that our generations before us, you know, have gotten into, particularly things like tribalism, corruption. You know, these are things that our generation must fight. And I believe if we choose to think like that, South Sudan will be in a great place. I believe it will.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more, Maxwell. As a diaspora member as well, I think we're better together, right? And you mentioned what Lul Deng is doing with the national basketball team. You know, this long weekend has been. I couldn't have asked for a better way to spend this weekend, right? You know, we had 3 games with the in the first round of African Basketball World Cup qualifiers, and we won 3 games. We won against Rwanda, against Cameroon, and against Tunisia, and that's what we did back in March, I believe. So we're 6-0 now, and you know, as someone who loves the sports of basketball, and just to follow the journey and the growth of this young team that was a few years ago unknown, you know, to the basketball world, and now that's what everybody is talking about. In fact, they have termed it as the Cinderella story, right?
Yeah.
You know, they a lot of people are still doubting. They're saying, you know, is this just something that is going to fade away, or are they for real? And I think, man, I mean, talk about the power of the diaspora, right? You've got these young players that have gone through, you know, great basketball programs here in North America and in Australia, and they're going back home. They're playing, like they're just moving the ball around. They're so skilled. You know, they've got the heart, and you know, they know the moment and what that opportunity means. You know, to put on the jersey and have the name of South Sudan on the jersey. They know what that moment is, and I think just having, you know, veteran Lul Deng there is even greater, right? I mean, he's a great guy, and you know, I think he is what South Sudan needs in all different sectors right now, right? You know, I wish we could have a Lul Deng in our government and our leadership. Not that I'm saying he should get involved now, because that's how you get corrupted.
You might get him in trouble, man. You might get him in trouble.
I don't want to get him in trouble here, but you know, it's kind of like I like to call it, you know, the Lul Deng effect. We need a Lul Deng in all aspects of South Sudan's, you know, social, economic, and political.
You know, on Twitter, you know, we be on Twitter. I don't mean to interrupt you, but you know, I know we be on Twitter, and I've seen someone tweet that at this point we should just have Lul Deng coach our government.
I saw that one. I thought that was hilarious. But
in all seriousness, like, you see how much pride and unity this has brought our people right now. It doesn't matter right now you from what tribe. You just know my team right now, our team is dominating the whole Africa. We're going to dominate the world soon. And I believe that, like, let's hang on to this feeling of unity right now that we have. Our generation can make that change. And I believe this basketball team is an incarnation of that. So I support it 100%. I support whatever he wants to do. I support him.
No doubt. It's definitely one of the few things right now that is bringing smiles to our faces as South Sudanese. Maxwell, I've got a question for you. You may not have expected it, but you know, I'm deep in value and you know, what keeps people grounded in what they do. And so, you know, the question for you is, what keeps you motivated? Like, what keeps you waking up in the morning and doing the things that you do? Like, what's that guiding star for you?
I'm going to start off by saying I'm a pretty self-motivated person. I've just always been like that. But I'll tell you this, you know, since, you know, I got appointed to city charter, I get messages almost weekly, every couple of days, just telling me how important it is, how this now gives other people motivation to get into public spaces that they didn't even think were possible, to just not stop, to keep going farther. You know, sometimes in life, we can all get content, or we can be like, okay, you know, I'm doing good. You know, we 5-0, but you know, it takes a lot to get to 50-0, like Floyd Mayweather. You know, like, there's got to be something that keeps pushing you. So for me, it's to continue to take the name of our country and continue to push it higher and higher, and bring more recognition to where we come from and to our story. That's my main goal. That's my main driving force, I would say. It's to be able to have our flag wave proudly. You know, wherever our flag is hanging, people are like, oh, that's South Sudan, man. Those people, they're great people. They're doing a lot of great things in the world. That's my ultimate goal.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I know it can be a personal question sometimes, but as you can understand, I'm just, you know, you are an accomplished guy at your age, and you know, I think someone just doesn't wake up overnight and say, I'm going to get involved with the local government, right? There's got to be something there in the work that you're doing, representing our community. You know, your push to start Kush Consolidated and try to push and rebrand our narrative as a South Sudanese community in the States and in Omaha, Nebraska itself. I mean, that says a lot about who you are and your relation and your aspiration for your community, your country, South Sudan. Max, this has been a great conversation. I could go on and on with you, but before I let you go, how can people connect with you in the world of social media? Like, where are you wasting your time nowadays?
Oh man, I'm on Twitter a lot. I don't comment a lot. I laugh, man. You guys really make my day. But you can reach me. My Instagram is South Sudan Max. So that's South Sudan Max, one word. I have a Facebook, Maxwell Wuriem James Morgan. My Twitter, South Sudan Max. Pretty much all my socials are South Sudan Max. You can also reach, if you want to reach out to the podcast, it's Kush Convos Podcast, the IG. Also Kush Convos TV on YouTube. Check it out. We got some new material coming for you soon. A lot of things, a lot of merchandise coming out. That's all going to be in the bio link of Kush Convos Podcast IG page.
Great. Thank you very much for coming on Leaders in Focus, Maxwell. I'm glad and honored that you were my first guest who accepted the invitation. It's been a great conversation. I'll make sure to follow up with your work with the City Council, as well as Kush Consolidated LLC and your podcast, and see, what could bring us together. I'm open to any collaborations. If there's anything I can help with, feel free to reach out. This has been Maxwell Morgan, guys. He's, as you heard, he's involved doing a great job with the City Council in Nebraska. He's also an entrepreneur, co-owner of Kush Consolidated LLC, and he's involved with his podcast startup, Kush Convos Podcast. Make sure to follow him. Also, make sure to follow us at Leaders in Focus, wherever you find or wherever you listen to your podcast. We are on Anchor FM. We are on Spotify, Apple, Android, and make sure to leave us a review. We want to grow this program, share these stories from Maxwell and others with our South Sudanese community, both in the diaspora and at home as well. So leave us a review, like us, subscribe so you can be notified when the new episode is available. And thank you for listening. And for now, take care of yourself and somebody else if you can. Thank you.
Peace and blessings.